Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It's time to top off your morning coffee or afternoon tea or your favorite after-work beverage, because today we're joined by Sean Ryan, a Senior Product Marketing Manager from Imperva, for part 3 of our 3-part series on migrating to the cloud safely and securely. Now, if you're like me, I know many of you are on your way to the cloud. You've got one foot in the traditional data center, one foot not in someone else's, and we don't have the luxury necessarily of being cloud native or born in the cloud, as they say. So we're all in this kind of boat together about moving things from on-prem to the cloud. And Sean's going to go through a presentation with us today. We're going to save some time at the end for Q&A to kind of dig into that. I want to remind everybody also, though, over in the attachments and links section, we do have a copy of Sean's presentation along with links to parts 2 and part 1 in this 3-part series dealing with multiple factors and best practices for migrating into the cloud, minimizing the risk, and dealing with the risk of application development as well as our data move. We've also got some information there from Open Research on why data security is an absolute must, and then some additional information on Imperva and the solutions they offer to assist in this particular area. So I did mention that this is going to be interactive, but we're going to save the Q&A to the end. That doesn't mean you have to wait until the end to give us your questions. As Sean's going through his presentation, if something occurs to you, a comment, a question, fire it off through the questions tab. I'll be keeping an eye on that through my back end here, and again, we'll save that for the end. Also, do take a moment at the end and give us a rating. Let us know how we did. Sean and I and the group back at the ranch will talk about this afterwards, and we want to know what worked and what didn't, because we constantly tune this program to make sure that it hits the mark for you and your educational needs that you need in your own professional development. So give us some feedback at the end. Occasionally we do have technical difficulties, so I want to let everybody know that if the audio cuts out or the slides seem to freeze or the player goes dark on you, usually just hit refresh on your browser tab there. We'll bring things back to life. And there's no need for a reboot or relog in or anything like that. Also, if you're listening live or if you're even listening to us on the archive, as long as you stick with us for 45 minutes through today's conversation, your CPEs will automatically post to your ISC Squared account. Usually takes about 5 days. If you don't hear anything after about a week or so, drop a line to member services, however, and they'll get you squared away. So with the housekeeping items out of the way, Sean, I want to pass the baton over to you. I know we've got a packed agenda here today, so I want to give you plenty of time to go through your material, and I'll keep an eye out for those questions from the audience.
Cool. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate the intro. Hi, everyone. Again, this is Sean Ryan, and I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager with Imperva. I focus on the data security side of our business, specific emphasis on cloud data security, data masking in particular, to name a couple. Today, I'd like to take you through some of the significant developments and trends related to organizational efforts to, as Brandon talked about, either migrate their data and data-driven processes to the cloud, or simply adopt cloud environments for new data and data processes, thereby driving that hybrid approach in terms of an on-prem cloud utilization. There are a variety of reasons organizations are adopting the cloud, and we'll dig into those. We'll also look at some of the actual and perceived risks, particularly around data security. Obviously, that's an emphasis in an area that I'm focused on. And we'll talk about how to best mitigate these and support your overall data security strategy and compliance efforts. So with that, let's dig in here. So first, let's take a look at some of the key trends, drivers, and benefits associated with moving to the cloud. Some of this, again, will be common knowledge for many on the line, but we'll take a spin through it quickly before we get into some of the other aspects of the agenda here. I mean, it comes as no surprise that global spending on cloud services and infrastructure is growing at a significant rate. In fact, according to IDC, overall spending is approximately $210 billion as of 2019 and expected to grow roughly 20–25% over the next 5 years and expected to reach about $370 billion in 2022. So obviously those are significant numbers and probably understated in the grand scheme of things. The growth is driven by the fact that most organizations have or will adopt public cloud in some fashion as a cost-effective platform for hosting enterprise applications, storing and growing their increasingly complex data stores, and for developing and deploying customer-facing applications and solutions. And we'll talk some more about that as we get into this. Simply put, more organizations are looking to the cloud to serve as a method to manage and harness the explosion of data capture, storage, growth, and to use the cloud as a platform to drive digital innovation. So the drive towards cloud adoption can be attributed to any number of factors, depending on an organization's specific needs. But in most cases, the potential for things like cost savings, flexibility, and scalability are key. Again, with that growing data set, those variables are significant. With data capture continuing to grow and the use cases in test and development and other functions continuing to grow, the on-premise world is simply being outgrown and becoming inefficient to meet the demands of developers and for the business innovation side of things as well. However, with these advantages come some actual and in other cases some perceived or worrisome challenges and risks that must be acknowledged and effectively managed to ensure optimal cloud migration and adoption. And that's what we're going to get into today. Specifically, these issues center around things like connectivity and other technical challenges or requirements or concerns around using a public cloud. These are consistently raised, as are concerns around long-term contracts, renewals, support being offered by public cloud providers. Both of these are valid and should be fully vetted during the review process prior to selecting a cloud provider, and again, we'll talk more about that. But a third and significant concern centers around security and compliance, so specifically around the security of sensitive data being migrated to or stored in the cloud, the access to this data, and the risk of innocent or malicious exposure, obviously leading potentially to a significant security or data breach event. This key concern is pretty much universal. You'll see this in pretty much every study or survey that you see, and you'll see some of that today. And security experts consistently cite this particular variable as the key reason why they express concerns over cloud adoption and why they may challenge the organization or developers or the IT shop in terms of how and if they should move to cloud, particularly a public cloud. So we'll move into some of that as well. So building on the previous slide, which focused on some of those core benefits or challenges around cloud adoption, let's look at some of the more strategic drivers for why organizations are moving to the cloud. Organizations in all sectors are transforming how they do business. That's no surprise. How they interact and engage with customers, and how they evolve and develop business applications for new products and services. All of this transformation lends itself to cloud migration or adoption as businesses look to become more efficient and effective in delivering those innovations and delivering those customer-focused solutions. The cloud enables this versus kind of the on-prem legacy type environments. So the transformation of test and development functions, along with the search for greater agility, flexibility, mobility of data and processes, are all kind of key drivers, consistently so. Most surveys you look at will show similar results, and I believe this will be the trend as we continue to move forward, again, looking for that agility and flexibility to enable greater innovation and speed of innovation. So as mentioned previously, the move to the cloud may take many different forms depending on the organization. What we're seeing on a global scale is a shift from the historical on-premise world in terms of the storage and workload functioning to, as we talked about at the top, and in most cases, a hybrid model that includes a mix of legacy on-prem environments and public/private cloud environments in that hybrid type model. This evolution will likely continue to develop and shift over time. But currently, the adoption of public clouds for at least part of an organization's data and workload continues to grow, continues to expand, and most of our experience in industry trending indicates that this is occurring in many cases with all new data and related workloads. And in many cases, the legacy data is remaining on-prem or slowly migrating to the cloud as kind of a lag relative to new data, new processes. And this is particularly true in our experience with the larger enterprise type of organizations and those with a significant volume of sensitive data in-house. But I believe, too, that this will continue to shift as efficiencies continue to be sought out and concerns around data security and cloud security become alleviated. And we'll talk about how we might go about that a little bit later. So when we talk about that migration, and Brandon touched on it at the top, many organizations with dominant on-premise data and workload environments, the migration to the cloud typically follows or should typically follow a relatively standard migration path, one of which we can see here. And there's many different models, but the focus is and should be a methodical, well-planned, comprehensive execution plan that cuts across the organization in terms of involvement and planning and execution. And it can be quite significant in terms of time and resources. Further, with the volume of data and data-driven processes on site in many, particularly enterprise-sized organizations, the effort can be daunting. Compounding this is the actual and perceived data security risks that, if realized, could cripple the organization and its long-term reputation. So what's the result of that? Well, many organizations either stall the migration effort, particularly when the various security concerns and risks are identified, or they choose to instead focus cloud adoption, as I mentioned earlier, on just that new data and new workflows or initiatives, as opposed to migrating legacy data and applications to the cloud. Again, I believe this trend will be part of the migration process, and this too will change as time goes on and security concerns are better alleviated. And again, that necessity of agility and innovation speed should force that hand in terms of moving things to the cloud in a secure manner. Either way, the key point here is that organizations that are moving to the cloud are doing so strategically. They're leveraging effective migration planning to mitigate risk, and that's a key aspect of this to ensure that some of these key questions and risk areas are not avoided but embraced, explored, and planned for. And again, we'll explore that in detail. So the other variable here, and again, Brandon touched on this at the outset, is around moving away from those that are migrating to the cloud, that cloud native concept. There's also those companies that were quote unquote born in the cloud, or those that are cloud native in the sense that they are storing or activating development activities entirely in the cloud. And as noted, this type of cloud activity is poised to grow significantly over the coming years and has been over the past 3 or 4 years. And in fact, over 30% growth is projected in terms of new application development. So to put this into context, that's more than 100% increase in the total number of cloud native apps being deployed over the next few years. So what's driving this increase to cloud native adoption or initiate operations in this manner? Well, a recent Capgemini survey that we came across indicated 3 core drivers for a cloud native type approach. And again, no surprise, improved business agility being at the top of the list, improving collaboration, particularly with external partners, and leveraging external partners to drive innovation and the ability to do that, and the opportunity to improve customer experiences and improve the quality of the applications being developed and deployed, all driving towards this cloud native move. So by enabling faster application development, testing, deployment, a cloud native strategy naturally helps to increase business velocity and responsiveness to change. Now, obviously, it's much easier for organizations in certain verticals and certain size to execute a move to this type. But again, there's pros and cons and variables to come into play in terms of how and under what premise you'd want to look at a cloud native type model. So let's take a brief look at some of the trends and just kind of build on that that we're seeing with cloud migration, cloud utilization, and adoption. Of course, as we mentioned, cloud adoption is huge these days, as evident by the spend projections and drivers we talked about. When Forrester looked at this data currently on the screen 3 years ago from North America, it was actually half of what it is today. So companies have been testing with internal private clouds, and they've gotten more comfortable and put themselves into hosted and then the public cloud environment. So not surprisingly, many of the clients our teams talk to at Imperva say a hybrid cloud model is their strategy and will most likely be the strategy of choice moving forward. They want to have multiple clouds, and the majority of them have even 5+ cloud platforms that they're using. So again, there's not this one size fits all. And when we start to look at some of the risks and security challenges and methods to secure that is not going to be a one-size-fits-all model either. It'll need some flexibility, need effective planning and understanding the organizational needs, but I won't get ahead of myself here. We'll plow through and get into that in due course. In terms of cloud users and cloud adoption, 3 industries, professional services, discrete manufacturing, and banking are the current core users, each projected to spend more than $20 billion on public cloud services in 2019, according to the IDC, and this amounts to 1/3 of the worldwide total. The top 5, for curiosity purposes, rounded out by manufacturing, process manufacturing specifically, and the retail sector, both projected to spend more than $15 billion in the current year. So further, this top 5 is projected to remain largely intact over the next 5 years in terms of the mix, as a result of, I guess, their initial and continued investment and belief in the public cloud solutions and infrastructure that they're leveraging. And so with respect to usage and cloud strategy, again, a little bit of a double back on this point. The vast majority of adopters have or will adopt that multi-cloud strategy, which can take the form of multiple public clouds and providers, for example, AWS or Azure, along with private cloud usage and the on-premise environments as well. Again, the key point here is that while there's consistency in terms of multi-cloud approach or a general move towards this model, there's great variation in terms of how this is implemented and what this will mean for cloud service providers themselves in providing development security features and functionality to enable consistency across those organizations and their various cloud environments. So in cloud computing, the line of responsibility is often blurred between the vendor and the user. So this chart is a relatively common one to kind of break this down. The simplest way to understand the division of labor is that the cloud vendor is responsible for security of the cloud, while the customer is responsible for security in it. The chart here outlines this division. It's outlined the core cloud service options as broken down by the 3 most common, including infrastructure as a service. So you can think of this as what you migrate to, platform as a service, or what you can build on, and software as a service, or what you can consume in a truly and fully managed consumable option. If we focus on specifically on data and data storage options through database as a service, as a kind of a niche within this. Recent IDC surveys indicate that this option will account for 15 to 20 billion of that total public cloud spend by 2020, which is up between 60 and 70% over the previous 5 years. And this is expected to continue to grow in a double-digit fashion in the years to follow. And this, to me, makes sense given the continued and exponential growth of data capture and storage and use across pretty much any vertical. So looking specifically at database service options and storing options, again, will become quite significant, and the flexibility and agility that provides will drive folks to that, which leads into the next slide here. So again, going a little deeper on database as a service, key drivers for organizations looking at this specific piece of cloud adoption are quite similar, as I mentioned, to those for cloud migration overall. The significant increase in data volume, in user requirements, specifically in test and dev environments, and the rapid pace and expectations related to application development and delivery has made database as a service a key option for organizations, and we're seeing that at our organization and customers we have as well as being a big variable. And again, the flexibility and scalability of database service options are quite attractive to developers, while security teams are even more concerned in this scenario with the security of sensitive customer data in those environments and with those providers, and specifically concerns around visibility and oversight. And we'll get into some specific stats around that. So to that point, let's go a little deeper on some of the challenges and concerns around cloud adoption, and specifically around data storage and public database service options. And we'll go through some of this and some things that we've seen in the industry, and also specifically some research that we've done. So when we look at public cloud use and public cloud environments, whether for organizations migrating to the cloud or those born in it, the areas of concern are pretty consistent, and they're relatively consistent regardless of the report, the survey, or the sector being covered. Specifically, security of data and applications and the related risk around governance and compliance are at the top of the list. While there are various processes and tools available to mitigate these risks, the fact is it's security leaders' responsibility to be concerned about this. It's the CISO's responsibility to be concerned about this. to challenge developers and to ensure that the risks are either addressed or mitigated to an acceptable degree and discharge the organization's responsibility as it relates to securing that data in the cloud. And we'll go through that. Interestingly, most studies show that cloud-related concerns are consistent across industry verticals and also with regards to organizational size. So it's not just an enterprise-scale concern or issue or worry. And as noted here, security is still top of mind and the number one. We're talking an enterprise-scale organization or that SMB. The good news is that this concern or challenge is in fact manageable with the right assessment, planning, and security solution implementation. In fact, I'd argue that the security challenge, while obviously significant and not to be understated, is more manageable with expert support and off-the-shelf solutions in comparison with some of the other business-focused concerns that are highlighted on the screen. Things like resource issues, expertise in terms of cloud migration and management, and overall resource allocation and availability. So looking at securing the data might be a much easier issue to solve than some of those other business-focused things. So building on that previous slide, I want to share some data that we collected as Imperva at a recent AWS event through an independent third-party research firm. Our objective was to gather some insights from IT experts and security professionals related to cloud migration and specifically around database as a service. Again, it's a trend we're seeing, and we want to dig into this a little bit and validate some of these industry findings and trends that we're seeing and some things that you've probably seen as well floating around in terms of concerns and stats. So first, of those surveyed, 86% indicated that their organization was leveraging public cloud and database as a service options currently. So that's a fairly significant number. I think there was roughly 200 professionals surveyed. So again, significant, but not really that surprising given it was an AWS event and the audience involved included organizations and in many cases progressive leaders and organizations as well. When we asked what factors came into play in selecting a provider, security once again came to the forefront, coming in around 36%. And it's worth noting that this question was related to what factors come into play when choosing a provider. It wasn't a question, and we'll get to that, but it wasn't a question about what their primary concern was. It was what are they looking at when they're considering a cloud provider. So clearly it's an important pervasive issue that warrants attention from not only the internal folks assessing cloud and database service options, but from the providers themselves and understanding that this is something that's top of mind in addition to the scalability, in addition to pricing and so on that decision makers are looking at. So those providers need to understand that this is a variable that needs not only to be thought about, but to be promoted as part of their sales pitch as well. So further, when we asked specifically about confidence levels in database security of public cloud offerings, the results weren't overly surprising in that the majority currently feel greater confidence in on-premise security capability, and this is likely due to greater confidence in the ownership, bricks and mortar type confidence, and on-site security efforts and visibility relative to public cloud environments. So clearly, cloud providers can and should continue not only to advance their security platforms, but also, again, advance their talk track in their marketing efforts to focus significantly on the security side of the equation, as it's clearly a purchase criterion and potentially a blocker for adoption for many CISOs and many organizations as well. We wanted also to get a sense of what the specific security concerns were when considering cloud database service options. And the survey respondents were clear. It's about mainly operational disruptions and the risk of data breach events. So DDoS attacks and the risk of data exposure. Largely, innocent leaks from privileged users or insiders. Those are the key variables that were cited. The concerns likely vary depending on the organization, its security posture, and obviously the organization's risk tolerance levels. But either way, it's critical that the risks are identified, analyzed, and effectively mitigated, and something that we'll explore next. So we've discussed some of the concerns and risks around cloud and database as a service migration. Let's move into the what and the hows associated with mitigating those risks and enabling effective migration or adoption. It's important to note that the security concern associated with cloud adoption is not, I repeat, not generally recognized as a fault of the cloud service provider per se. In fact, analysts such as Gartner and others note that the concern and risk is really on the organization and the end user. So that accountability still rests with the organization. CISOs and CIOs can combat this risk by implementing and enforcing policies around cloud ownership and the responsibility and risk acceptance within the organization. They should also be sure to follow a lifecycle approach to cloud governance and put in place central management and monitoring plans to cover the inherent complexity of multi-cloud use. So we'll look at this in detail. So when looking at cloud environments, multi-cloud environments, hybrids, and so on, the focus on data security and efforts to mitigate exposure risks are relatively straightforward in terms of a conceptual level view of it. So in simple terms, you need to know who exactly is accessing what data. Is the data access okay? You need to discern what data access is considered appropriate, what is not. And once an inappropriate or suspicious data access has been identified, how are you becoming aware of this? How are you responding? So regardless of cloud provider, your main focus here is on ensuring that your organization has solutions in place to enable visibility into who is accessing what data in the cloud, when they're accessing it, and how it's being used. Also, you're looking for solutions that accurately identify any suspicious data access and provide actionable insights to respond to issues and potential data breach events. This is critical in terms of advancing security and comfort within your security team. So again, following the trail of access and use here is going to be critical regardless of it's a single cloud environment, whether it's a public cloud, on-prem. Maintaining that view is obviously critical as a starting point to securing that data and addressing those concerns. So building on that, and in terms of effective data security overall, regardless of the environment, the steps are clear. We advise our customers and offer solutions that support essentially a 5-step iterative process that starts with the critical discovery and classification process. Again, regardless of we're talking on-prem, in the cloud, or so on. Understanding what databases you have, what data is within them, who's accessing it, is key to supporting that data security and addressing the visibility and oversight concerns security teams have around their data and applications. And it's particularly true as it relates to public cloud data stores. The output of this process, this discovery and classification process, allows for a true risk assessment and automated solutions that categorize and report on data and access events greatly simplify the process and allow you to make informed decisions on how best to manage the applications, the data, and the tools to effectively secure it as part of that risk assessment. Then it's all about ongoing monitoring, having a view to all the environments, including your public clouds, including your database service providers, all access points, all applications, all data, ideally in real time and in one centralized location. This will help ensure ongoing review and adjustments as required pending any abnormal activity or events. So again, it's really about that visibility and oversight. It also helps manage your obligations with respect to industry compliance and having processes and tools in place to securely monitor data and activity. Detection of anomalies and applying a predetermined response plan will discharge your responsibilities as it relates to that. And there are solutions available. I'm not going to go into a big sales pitch for Imperva here, but there are solutions available to support this process. Off-the-shelf SaaS-type solutions that make this easy for you if it's not your core business. In most cases, it shouldn't be your core business, but it's a critical part of your business in terms of monitoring, discovering, classifying, monitoring, and ongoing visibility of your data. So there are those options available. In terms of selecting cloud providers, we talked at the top about some of the the key concerns and challenges and things that many organizations are looking at. Once you've determined what your needs are from a business perspective and a development perspective, and how you want to share the responsibility between your organization and the provider, you're in a position then to ask the right questions, both internally and of prospective cloud providers. Further, there are some key and critical steps that you can follow to determine the best cloud service option for your needs. Some of this is highlighted on the screen here now. And along with simultaneously ensuring that the appropriate controls are in place to meet your, in many cases, unique organizational requirements and compliance needs around security. So for example, you'll want to evaluate the cloud provider's security controls and features. Many have some base level security and features. And conduct a gap assessment relative to your on-premise feature set or your policies or both, comparing providers and assessing which one best meets your needs as a base level control set before you start looking at adding or augmenting to that availability. Also, there's a variety of tools and questionnaires available out there to help compare and contrast cloud providers and their security posture. Something that should be conducted by all organizations looking at these options. So going through that exercise and evaluating a variety of cloud providers and their security offerings to, again, see which best meets their needs. And then completing that full evaluation, including that of third-party security vendors, such as Imperva, that offer solutions that augment existing organizational data or application security features, and those offered by cloud providers or those that you are intending to migrate or hoping to migrate to public cloud environments, and seeing where this all stands is really a table stakes effort that, again, will help in terms of selling the cloud migration or cloud adoption within your organization. So essentially doing your homework. So building on that, and again, so a bit of an eye chart here, a bit of text here, but once you've assessed those cloud providers and begin the process of executing a cloud migration or adoption strategy, you want to ensure that all the gaps are closed, or at least significantly reduced. And this can become challenging when looking at that multi-cloud or hybrid environment. So migrating applications and data to the cloud can result in incomplete or inconsistent security practices and policies, and we see this quite a bit with organizations that we initiate discussions with, and they've started this process, but they've realized that they've got gaps there, or they can't migrate certain processes or certain features, and they get kind of stuck in, okay, where do we go from here? And this is particularly the case in hybrid type environments. And this creates significant risk for the organization in terms of both application and data security and the risk of accidental or malicious breaches, and also adherence with various privacy and related industry compliance requirements. So the steps outlined here and on the previous slide will certainly support the effort in reducing the risk, but there are other factors to consider. Key here is the review and analysis of existing policies and those selected of the selected vendor. So when you're looking at those, again, those public cloud providers or those database as a service providers, again, looking at what features and functionality do they provide, looking at yours and how they align, ensuring that the gaps are identified, looking at what policies need to migrate to the cloud in the event that they are not already covered. Also critical here is understanding what options you have to deploy an existing in-house or a third-party security solution or solutions to the cloud. So are there any restrictions here? Restrictions that you need to be made aware of prior to selecting a vendor and potentially leveraging existing solutions that you have. In some cases, this is a simple plug-and-play effort where other scenarios may not allow for external solutions. So assessing this is key. It may factor in as it relates to selecting the vendor and or cybersecurity vendor that you want to work with. So that's a key exercise that you want to undertake and build into your analysis plan. At the end of the day, closing the gap and driving strategy, policy, and solution parity within newly migrated or newly adopted cloud environments is the key point. There are vendors out there, such as Imperva, that offer solutions support for cloud migration and adoption and to help you navigate through this effectively. Again, the key is understanding what your objectives are, what cloud environment and model makes most sense from a business perspective, and then conducting this gap analysis and control exercise to ensure you're aware of blind spots and your security gaps. So again, it's not about burying the head in the sand and avoiding risk. It's really about recognizing it, bringing it out in the open that this is a key challenge and a key perceived challenge internally that needs to be evaluated, effectively addressed, and then looking at this, evaluating options and documenting the process can take a logical flow from there. So in a world where security and data breaches dominate the headlines, the concerns that surround cloud adoption can become the focal point of the organizational narrative, and this can sometimes overshadow the benefits. So in fact, the concerns about security have led, that we talked about earlier, some organizations and some CISOs to continue inhibiting organizational use of public clouds, public cloud services, and database as a service as an example. And this will no doubt continue for some time based on the trends and stats we've looked at today. However, the challenge exists not in the security of the cloud itself, again, but in the policies and technologies for security and control of that cloud technology. In nearly all cases, it's the user, not the cloud provider, who fails to manage and control, effectively protect the organization's data. So CISOs need to ensure their security teams are not holding back cloud initiatives with exaggerated security worries and potentially missed opportunities. And further, the real question that needs to be asked is not whether the cloud is secure, but rather, are we leveraging the cloud securely, and have we done what we need to do to make sure this is effectively managed? So it's the CISO and the security team's responsibility to flush out these questions and answers and align with recommendations for developing a cloud strategy and predictions for the future of cloud security, and really focusing on how do we get there effectively and securely. So as we wrap up, I'll leave you, and before we get into Q&A, I'll leave you with a few key parting thoughts. So again, first, cloud adoption offers a variety of advantages, and again, focusing here a little bit more on public cloud and focusing on database as a service options. Key advantages to the organization, both from a development and innovative standpoint that support ongoing growth and competitive advantage type things, and from an efficiency and agility standpoint. At the end of the day, cloud adoption is now a must-have component of an organization's data and data process strategy. So it's really about how do we effectively tackle this and either migrate and or adopt cloud environments to essentially keep up. I think it's becoming more of a must-have and a keep up with the Joneses type scenario here versus being leading edge or cutting edge type of a move. Second, if you're on the developer side or you're on the IT innovation side of the house, you are likely eager to explore or further augment your cloud adoption efforts, but you're no doubt running into some pushback around the security and compliance concerns that we've talked about. And as we've outlined here, it's key to recognize the concern, conduct the appropriate assessment efforts, and work with your security experts to implement a strategy for optimizing cloud adoption and mitigating risk to an acceptable level. Again, the likelihood of eliminating risk is very low. It's really about effectively managing, mitigating it, and ensuring that it meets with thresholds established within your organization, within the industry requirements or regulations that you are required to abide by. And finally, implementing a security strategy as part of the cloud migration or adoption effort will benefit greatly from the exploration, again, of third-party solutions and expertise to help with that visibility and oversight of the applications and data. So again, it doesn't need to be part of your core business. You need to recognize, what options are available, what your gaps are, merge the two and find solutions that allow your business to continue to evolve, leverage the power of the cloud, and manage those risks from a security perspective. So with that, I think we're closing off on the slide. Brendan, I'm sure we've got some questions from the audience there that we can maybe take a look at.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Really appreciate the material you presented. I think you made a comment about some of it being an eye chart, and I just want to remind the audience members that we do have a copy of the presentation over in the attachments and links section, along with links to the previous 2 sessions in this 3-part series. I know I find that getting my hands on the deck, especially when it's dense with statistics and such as what you've given us today, is definitely helpful. And for those of you perhaps in the future, if it's a little hard to read, you can always switch to full screen mode as opposed to that little window. Helps it out as well. But let's get into some of the Q&A now, Sean. I'm real curious. A couple of the slides kind of spoke to me in some of the experience that I have, especially responsibility matrix and kind of where the database as a service is kind of shifting, that platform versus the infrastructure. It seems to me that maybe it's a no-brainer from my perspective that moving to the cloud or actually starting new development in the cloud could actually be, safer, quote unquote, shall we say, than doing this on-prem, simply because you're getting the benefits and the leverage of the cloud provider in the process. Why do you think it is that folks are lagging a little bit on this? You mentioned the security and compliance concerns, but is it that loss of control as we cede more of that responsibility to the provider, or is this something that's driven more from a fear of the audit action? I'm trying to kind of get to kind of the root cause, shall we say?
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great question, and I think I have to use the it's all of that, or it depends type of answer. But our experience and a lot of the a lot of the customers we deal with and conversations we have out there, a lot of it centers around concern around security, concern around the volume of sensitive data, fear around the unknown, and in many cases, some of the activities that I've referenced here today in terms of that development work or planning and development work around cloud migration haven't been fully vetted, haven't been fully conducted. So there's some legacy views on what the risks are that may or may not be well-founded in terms of what security features and functionality are available or what solutions are available to mitigate these risks. But we really see that scenario where there's just this, particularly the security team and the security side of the house, this, and understandably so, this complete view and concerted view that, okay, we're not risking a significant data breach event at the expense, expense of our customer, our reputation, and so on, for modest gains in development capability or agility capability and so on. So I think there's both sides of the house are kind of dig their heels in some cases, and I think, again, back to this notion of developing and executing a detailed migration plan that highlights the risk areas that will no doubt come up, that really provides some substantiated facts around the benefits and the business benefits with key metrics, with statistics and proven results. And then at the same time, not ignoring the security risks and providing, again, that full view and a significant mitigation plan such that, there's decisions being made on migration that are well-educated decisions and well-educated discussions versus just kind of the high-level fears being experienced, in the news and otherwise.
Well, it's funny. We had another one of these events very recently, and one of the things that came up, which I thought was interesting, was the business is more concerned with availability of a service, application, data set, whatever, than they seem to be about security. And you've actually highlighted some of the elements about security and compliance kind of rising as top. We had a question from the audience come in about that. Are people just assuming when they move to the cloud that they're getting kind of the availability and integrity part of the CIA triad, and the only thing that they're worried about from a security and compliance perspective is really the confidentiality? Is that why we're seeing that kind of that shift, or is it perhaps due to the fact that we've kind of decentralized IT and allowed the business to kind of self-serve with cloud services? And so that may be driving the conversation in a slightly different conversation. Do you have any perspective on kind of the shift, shall we say, in operational availability versus the security?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that's definitely variable in terms of the ability to consume and the ease of consumption of certain options, from a development standpoint, and the ability for the development side of the house to access and use these services and features. I think that is a variable worth noting in terms of the concerns that are being raised, and making sure that as folks are accessing and leveraging these easy to consume options, that security and containment is being factored in. I think that goes back to the discussion around evaluating the solutions being considered, evaluating the vendors and their capabilities and offerings, and seeing what that base level security posture is, seeing what needs to be augmented, ensuring that existing policies, existing access controls and rights and so on are being adhered to, so it doesn't become a bit of a Wild West mentality that, okay, great, we can leverage these options to make our life easier, and just ignore what we had been doing on-prem for the past decade or what have you. So I think that is a concern. I think it's back to bringing both sides of the house together and evaluating and making sure that, you know, decisions being made around migration and or utilization are you know, fully visible and transparent to all those in the organization that have a role in accessing and or securing the data.
Well, I also like your approach to kind of doing where in kind of the life cycle of this migration or analysis phase to actually insert security as a function and as a governance and oversight component. And I think that's critical, getting in there early, getting ahead of the business. And you talked a bit about, you know, policy and governance, letting people know what the appropriate, you know, technological safeguards are as kind of their on-ramp, shall we say, to the cloud, so the business can make those migrations. I think it's also very important. But we had a question come in from the audience, and this dovetails a little bit with what we were talking about ahead of this webinar, and that is, this is all great if you've got a project management office that can get in front of these things, if you've got an army of security professionals that can walk out to the business and consult to them on their projects. What about smaller organizations that maybe are a little more limited in resources? You know, everybody's talking about how the cloud kind of enables, you know, you're allowed to automate your infrastructure activities and your platform activities, and there's all these benefits and cost savings for labor. But if you're trying to get in front of all these different initiatives, do you have any advice for the smaller, shall we say, enterprises?
Yeah, no, great question, great point. I think, you know, we touched on it briefly during the presentation, but, you know, I think, you know, a couple of things. One, you know, having worked with and been involved with some small organizations directly myself, I think that is an absolutely valid question and concern. And one of the things that we look at is, you know, what are they doing currently around data and application security? And again, looking at those existing solutions and or policies on-prem, and let's assess what we have before we even talk about cloud migration and concerns around security there. So, for example, has an effective discovery and data classification exercise, as an example, being conducted? So a lot of small organizations, I mean, you can pick, you know, even larger, but still SMB type law firms and so on that I've spoken to, really understanding what sensitive data do they have on hand. In a lot of cases, that exercise hasn't been conducted, and you know, that's a key first step prior to even looking at cloud migration and understanding, okay, what do we have, what's sensitive, what can be pared back, what can be eliminated, what do we want to move to the cloud, are certain sensitive fields, for example, or databases entirely, are they necessary? Do they need to be moved to the cloud, and so on? So again, taking stock of what you have is an exercise, regardless of organizational size, that should be initiated, and something that before we even consider cloud migration, we look at that. And again, trying to minimize that footprint, minimize the risk level in the cloud, would provide your CISO and your security teams with comfort as you move into the cloud. And then the companion piece of that is, again, from a small business standpoint, what we're seeing, again, cloud providers themselves offering a greater level of security feature and functionality and process control than what they had initially in past years. Again, in light of those concerns being raised, and in light of the fact that it's becoming part of a purchase decision for many organizations when looking at cloud providers, there are features and functionality within the cloud providers offering, and again, within databases as a service, as an example, within those offerings as well, that may or may not meet the needs of a SMB. And there's also service options, again, third party, and Imperva as an example, and other organizations that are offering service options that can be consumed in a SaaS model. Again, clearly not core business for an SMB, the security side of things, but a necessity. Cost becomes an issue in many cases. So there are SaaS options available that allow you to avail of the benefits, avail of the security without those significant capital investments and investment in technology and so on, that really you're getting the value and the benefit without the investment and without the need for expertise and oversight in data or application security, particularly for the cloud.
Carrying on a little bit with kind of the organizational side of things, and I don't know if you have any insights into this or not, but I think it'd be interesting if you did. When we see these organizations, regardless of their size and capability, moving from on-prem to the cloud, you had some great statistics about cloud-native growth, right? That net new applications or even net new organizations are springing up on a given provider's environment, be it Azure, AWS, GCP, whatever. Have you seen anything about people migrating from one cloud to another? Maybe they were an early adopter on Azure and then decide, contractual obligations come up for renewal, things go out to bid, and they're like, oh, we're gonna move some database services over to AWS and go with some of the and going cloud to cloud instead of on-prem to cloud. Do you have any insights into how that may be playing out?
I haven't seen a whole lot of. We've had a couple of conversations with organizations that are customers of ours that have done that or have looked at that, and more so in the sense that it's more of a continuing to diversify, seeing benefits in Cloud X versus Cloud Y and adding that, or for a specific project, or to your point around renewals and the opportunity to secure, a good deal, for lack of a better term, with an alternative provider. So again, I think that all is leading into this multi-cloud and diversified cloud environment. I think the complexities of data stores and the complexities of the use cases and the end users are driving some of that. And I think from a security standpoint, again, that's when you're looking at, okay, where is that consistency across providers? Where is that consistency in terms of if on the organization, our policies and our expectations around security and other operational variables, and making sure that assessment is conducted in that, there's consistency in visibility, there's consistency in reporting. Again, if we use the discovery and classification concept, making sure that that's consistent regardless of provider, regardless if we moved from one cloud provider to another or we've added or augmented, making sure we have a full transparent view. The monitoring is consistent. The policy deployment is consistent. That is a key, again, back to that planning. And before we start to bring on multiple clouds, different providers, making sure that those concerns are vetted and recognized, and that there is consistency if that is a major concern for the organization.
Well, I've seen a lot of companies kind of trying to hedge their risk too. They'll put some services in one provider, some in another, and I think that transparency and consistency, especially when it comes to the monitoring that you've discussed, regardless of the provider you've chosen, that kind of service provider agnosticism that you bring, I think is actually really valuable, because that allows the business then to make a decision about what's going to be their best fit. And finance may decide to use one provider, and your line of business in North America might use a different one, and so getting that kind of consistency is good. But I want to ask you about the discovery and kind of classification before I have to turn you back loose to your day job here in a bit, and that is with kind of the balkanization, if you will, or the disconnection of traditional development occurring in IT, now moving to development and creation of services and applications in the cloud driven by the business. Do you have any advice for people on how to do that discovery and classification phase? Because if we're not involved early on in those assessments for these projects, we lose the fight, right? So is there any guidance that you have for people to give them kind of a leg up, shall we say, on the discovery and classification side?
Well, I think it's back to, and you touched on that point there, Brandon, around visibility and involvement. And I think, I know in discovery and classification exercises that we go through with our customers and supporting their efforts to do so as well, it's really about that upfront, spending the time upfront with the relevant owners and users of the various data stores and sources and conducting that and using purpose-built tools to conduct that exercise, and then again bringing the groups together. It can be time-consuming, but it's time well spent in terms of vetting the results of a discovery and classification exercise and understanding what is and what is not sensitive, understanding where data resides, who has access to it. Again, we always advocate this as being a critical first step in securing the data. Again, that notion of understanding what you have, where it is, who has access to it, and again, bringing the various groups together early on and going through that exercise. Highly recommend not doing it as a manual exercise, whether you use an Imperva solution or another solution, using a purpose-built tool to conduct this exercise and provide the data points for the organization to review. And again, I think this is critical prior to cloud migration, or if you've already gotten there, that's fine too, to go double back and go through it. But really understanding what that footprint is, understanding who owns it and who has access is critical to setting up the pins for a successful security strategy and for successfully containing risk and mitigating the risk around exposure, whether it be innocent or malicious exposure to data.
No, I agree. You definitely need some automation here, especially if you're going into your back catalog, as you mentioned, of things that have already gone and made that migration. And I love the fact that you bring up, making data-driven decisions, because we see there's still a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around a lot of this. And it seems like if you're not approaching the conversation with a robust set of statistics, metrics, and you're going to lose the conversation no matter what. At least I've seen in my experience. But Sean, I want to say huge thanks to you for taking time out and preparing and presenting for us today, and big shout out to Imperva as well for supporting this kind of programming, Privacy Square, and kind of their opportunity to kind of give back to the community. But fortunately, I got to let you go back to doing your day job there. Folks, I've already seen a number of comments come through on feedback, and it's been great to get your insights. If you take a minute, let us know not just how many stars you think we're worth, but also give us some comments. This is not a deep technical conversation, but I think we had a lot of great data in it, and I think it was a very good kind of business-led conversation. Let us know, did that hit the mark? Is that what you want to hear out of our programming? Because we do take that very seriously and do provide that feedback to our speakers and our sponsors for these events. Also, don't forget to keep your email preferences up to date so that you get notified of upcoming webcasts just like this one. You don't end up having to catch them on the archive. We love having you live because we can get your questions answered while we have our presenters and panelists available. So stay tuned. More to come on this topic and many others in this channel. Until next time, though, I look forward to continuing the conversation. Take care.